It was a little after 2 a.m. when I woke up. My apartment building was usually silent at night, but that night, there were voices. They echoed faintly through the stairwell outside my front door. Deep, rough voices mixed with occasional bursts of laughter. At first, I thought it was just a couple of neighbors talking, maybe coming back from a late shift. But the more I listened, the more uneasy I felt. The voices didn't sound casual. They were low, hushed, and there was something about their tone that made me freeze. I pulled my blanket tighter around me, debating whether to ignore it and go back to sleep. But then there was a loud thud, like someone stumbling against the metal railing. A few seconds later, more muffled laughter. My heart started beating faster. I lived alone, and my apartment was on the 3rd floor, not exactly a place where strangers should be hanging out at 2 in the morning. I slipped quietly out of bed and tiptoed to the door. I didn't want to make any noise, but curiosity got the better of me. I leaned toward the peephole, and that's when I froze. The peephole was dark, completely black. Someone had covered it. I didn't move at first. My eyes stayed locked on the peephole as my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just dark. There was something unnatural about how completely black it was. Normally, even at night, the dim light from the stairwell bled through, casting a blurry image of whoever stood outside. But now, nothing. I leaned back slowly, my pulse thudding in my ears. For a moment, the voices outside went silent. I held my breath, straining to hear. Then, faintly, I caught the sound of a whisper. It was too soft to make out the words, but it was definitely right outside my door. I stepped back, my bare feet pressing into the cool floor. My mind was racing. Should I call someone? Turn on the lights to make it look like I wasn't asleep? But then curiosity clawed its way back. I wanted to know what was happening out there. I bent down, my knees trembling slightly, and shifted toward the keyhole. My fingers gripped the doorknob, cold and firm beneath my touch. I hesitated for just a second, then lowered my eye to the tiny opening. Through the keyhole, I expected to see darkness. Instead, I saw an eye, a man's eye, wide open, unblinking, staring directly at me from the other side of the door. I froze. The eye didn't move. It didn't blink. It just stared at me through the keyhole. And in that second, my whole body went cold. I stumbled back, my shoulder hitting the wall behind me. My breath came in sharp bursts, my ears ringing with my own heartbeat. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe I was overtired. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. The voices outside had gone completely silent. The air felt heavier, as though the building itself was holding its breath. I wanted to scream, to shout for someone, but my voice wouldn't come. My throat felt locked, my mouth dry. Instead, I sank to the floor, pressing myself against the wall beside the door, away from the peephole, away from that keyhole. Minutes crawled by like hours. I couldn't bring myself to move. Every creak of the building, every sound from outside made my stomach clench. Then, a faint shuffle. Slow footsteps moving away from my door, echoing down the stairwell. I didn't dare check. I just sat there, knees pulled tight to my chest, listening to the fading sound until there was nothing. I don't know how long I sat there on the cold floor, my back pressed against the wall, every muscle in my body tight as if any movement might draw whoever was outside back to my door. The silence in the stairwell felt wrong. It wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the heavy, suffocating kind, like someone was still there, just standing and listening. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it, that maybe they'd gone, but the thought of checking the peephole or the keyhole again made my stomach twist. I pulled myself up slowly, my legs shaky, and crept to my bedroom. Every step felt loud, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the doorknob turning. Inside my room, I closed the door gently and turned on the TV, keeping the volume low. The flicker of light and the faint sound of voices made me feel less alone, as if maybe it would trick anyone outside into thinking there were more people inside. I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching my phone. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely unlock it. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but it was past 2 a.m., and my mind kept spiraling. What would I even say? That someone covered my peephole and stared back at me through my keyhole? The minutes dragged on. I could hear faint sounds from the stairwell now and then, something shifting, like a footstep or someone leaning on the railing. I told myself it could be the building settling. I didn't believe it. At some point, I realized I was holding my breath without meaning to. I forced myself to exhale quietly, afraid that even the sound of breathing might give me away. I stayed like that until the first hint of light crept through the window. My body felt heavy, exhausted, but my mind was still sharp with fear. Only when I was sure it was morning did I send a message to my friend, asking her to come over. I didn't tell her everything in the text, just that I needed her to visit as soon as she could. When my friend arrived later that morning, I didn't even open the door right away. I checked through the peephole first, just to make sure it was really her. The hallway looked normal in daylight, the same beige walls, the same scuffed floor. The silence was different now, lighter, almost ordinary. It was hard to believe that only hours ago I'd been too afraid to move. I opened the door quickly and pulled her inside, locking it behind us. She could tell something was wrong before I even started talking. I must have looked pale, my hair messy from a sleepless night. She sat me down at the kitchen table, and I told her everything. The voices, the covered peephole, the eye staring back at me through the keyhole. She stared at me for a moment, then looked toward my front door like she expected to see someone standing there. "You should have called me," she said quietly. "You should have called someone. That's not normal." I knew she was right, but in that moment, all I could think about was how paralyzed I'd felt. How I'd sat frozen, unable to even speak, let alone pick up the phone. She offered to stay with me for a few days just in case. I didn't even hesitate to agree. That night I felt a little safer with her there, but when the building settled and the walls creaked in the dark, I still found myself glancing at the door, half expecting to see that peephole go black again. I never saw or heard anything unusual in the stairwell after that night. The people who had been out there, whoever they were, didn't come back. But I stopped looking through the peephole at night, and I never, ever looked through the keyhole again.